I, 28F, have been with my boyfriend Ryan, 30M, for 6 years. We moved in together 2 years ago, and honestly, I thought everything was going great. We talk about the future, we're financially stable together, and I genuinely believed we were heading toward marriage. Last Tuesday, Ryan's phone kept buzzing during dinner. He usually ignores his phone when we're eating, but he kept glancing at it and seemed really distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, he said it was just work stuff. Later that night, his phone was charging on the kitchen counter, and it lit up with a text. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I could see it was from someone named Hartwell Jewelers, and the preview said, "Your custom ring is ready for pickup. Please bring." My heart stopped. I've never heard Ryan mention anything about jewelry, and he's not the type to buy expensive accessories for himself. The only reason I could think of for him to have a custom ring made was if it was an engagement ring. I was so excited I could barely sleep. I kept imagining how he might propose. Maybe on our anniversary next month, or during our planned trip to his parents' house for Christmas. I started mentally planning what I'd wear, how I'd tell my family, everything. But then Wednesday came, and Ryan was acting completely weird. He was quiet, kept checking his phone obsessively, and seemed like he was avoiding me. When I tried to talk to him about normal stuff, he gave me these short, distracted answers. Thursday was even worse. He came home from work and went straight to the bedroom without even saying hi. When I went to check on him, he was just sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he needed to talk to me about something important. My heart started racing because I thought this was it. He was going to propose. Instead, he told me he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship, and he wasn't sure we were right for each other anymore. He said he loved me, but he didn't know if he was in love with me, and he thought maybe we'd just gotten comfortable instead of actually being happy. I was completely blindsided. I asked him where this was coming from, and he said he'd been having these doubts for months, but kept hoping they'd go away. He said he felt like we were more like roommates than a couple, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. Then I remembered the text about the ring, and I asked him directly if he'd been planning to propose. His face went white, and he didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he admitted that yes, he had ordered a ring, but now he didn't know if he could go through with it. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I asked him how he could go from wanting to marry me to questioning our entire relationship, and he said that's exactly the problem. He wasn't sure he ever really wanted to marry me, or if he just thought he was supposed to because we've been together for so long. We've been sleeping in separate rooms since that conversation. Every time I try to bring it up, Ryan just says he needs more time to think. Meanwhile, I'm supposed to just wait around while he decides if he wants to be with me or not. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to fight for us, but how do you fight for someone who's already mentally checked out? And part of me is starting to wonder if he's right, and we have been just going through the motions without realizing it. Has anyone else been through something like this? How do you move forward when your partner suddenly questions everything you thought you had together? Update 1. 10 days later, I confronted Ryan about the ring, and everything exploded. I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore, so I told him I'd seen the text from the jewelry store, and I knew he'd had a custom ring made. I asked him to show it to me. He completely lost it. He started yelling about how I'd invaded his privacy and ruined what was supposed to be a surprise. I yelled back that there wasn't going to be a surprise because he'd already told me he didn't want to marry me. That's when he broke down and told me the truth. He said he'd picked up the ring 3 days ago. The same day, he came home acting weird. He said he'd been carrying it around in his car, trying to work up the nerve to propose, but every time he looked at it, he felt sick to his stomach. He said he'd even driven to our favorite restaurant twice, planning to propose there, but couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. The second time, he sat in the parking lot for an hour just staring at the ring box before driving home. I asked him to let me see the ring, and after a lot of back and forth, he went out to his car and brought it in. When he opened the box, I understood why he'd been so conflicted. It was absolutely perfect, a vintage-style setting with a sapphire center stone surrounded by small diamonds. It was exactly what I would have chosen, down to the smallest details. But seeing it just made everything more confusing. I told him the ring was beautiful and clearly showed he'd put a lot of thought into it. How could he have cared enough to get every detail right but not actually want to propose? That's when Ryan said something that's been haunting me. I wanted to want to marry you. I tried so hard to feel excited about it, but all I felt was trapped. He said he'd been forcing himself to go through the motions of being a good boyfriend for months, hoping his feelings would come back. He thought maybe if he took the next step and proposed, everything would click into place, and he'd remember why he loved me. But when he actually had the ring, he realized he was about to make a huge mistake. Not because there was anything wrong with me, but because he wasn't the right person for me anymore. I asked him what changed, and he said he didn't know. He said he'd wake up every morning feeling like he was playing a role instead of living his life. He said he loved me but felt like he was suffocating, and he didn't understand why. We had a huge fight after that. I told him it was cruel to string me along for months while he figured out his feelings, and he said he was trying to protect me by working through his issues privately. I said that wasn't his decision to make, and he said he knew that now but didn't know how to fix it. The fight ended with Ryan packing a bag and going to stay with his brother. He said he needed space to think, and I needed space to decide if I wanted to wait for him to figure out what he wanted. He left the ring on the kitchen counter. I've been staring at it for 3 days, and I still can't decide if it represents the future we could have had or the mistake we almost made. Update 2. 3 weeks later, Ryan came back to get more of his stuff yesterday, and we ended up having the most honest conversation we've had in months. I wish we'd had it sooner, because now I understand what really happened. When Ryan walked in, he looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his hair was a mess, and he had dark circles under his eyes. I asked him if he was okay, and he just broke down crying. He told me he'd been seeing a therapist, and they'd been working through why he'd been feeling so trapped in our relationship. What he discovered was that he'd been struggling with his identity for a lot longer than he'd admitted to me or himself. Ryan told me he's been questioning his sexuality since college, but he kept pushing those thoughts away because he genuinely cared about me and thought that meant he was straight. He said he'd convinced himself that his lack of physical attraction to me was just a normal part of long-term relationships. But when he started thinking about marriage, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He said the idea of committing to a lifetime of pretending to be someone he wasn't made him panic. That's why he felt trapped, not because of me, but because he was living a lie. I asked him why he didn't just tell me this months ago, and he said he was terrified. He said he didn't want to hurt me, and he kept hoping he was wrong about himself. He thought if he tried harder to be the boyfriend I deserved, maybe his feelings would change. The engagement ring was his last attempt to convince himself he was straight. He thought if he could just take that final step, everything would fall into place, and he'd stop having doubts about his sexuality. But when he picked up the ring, he realized he was about to ruin both of our lives. He said he couldn't propose to me knowing he'd never be able to love me the way I deserved to be loved. I was angry and heartbroken and relieved all at the same time. Angry that he'd lied to me for so long, heartbroken that our relationship was over, but relieved that I finally understood what had been wrong between us. I told Ryan I wished he'd trusted me enough to be honest about his struggles. I said I would have tried to support him through figuring out his identity, even if it meant our relationship couldn't continue. He said he knew that now, but at the time he was too scared and confused to think clearly. He said his therapist had helped him realize he'd been hurting both of us by staying in a relationship he knew wasn't right. We talked for hours about everything, the months of distance between us, the dead bedroom, the way he'd been going through the motions of being my boyfriend. It all made sense now. Ryan asked if I could ever forgive him for handling everything so badly. I told him I understood why he did what he did, but I needed time to process everything before I could think about forgiveness. He's moving out permanently next week. We're going to split the security deposit and break the lease. Ryan said he wanted to give me the engagement ring to do whatever I wanted with it, but I told him to return it and keep the money. I don't want anything to do with a ring that represented his attempt to stay in the closet. Update 3. 2 months later, I found out Ryan is dating someone. A man named Chris who works in his building. They've apparently been together for about a month. I didn't find out from Ryan. I ran into his coworker Jake at the grocery store, and he mentioned seeing Ryan with his new boyfriend at a restaurant downtown. Jake had no idea that Ryan and I had broken up or that Ryan is gay, so he was just making casual conversation. My first reaction was rage. Ryan had told me he needed time to figure himself out, but apparently he'd figured it out pretty quickly once he wasn't with me anymore. I felt like he'd been lying about needing space when what he really needed was to be with a man. But then I realized I wasn't really angry about him dating someone new. I was angry about how long he'd wasted both of our lives pretending to be straight. I texted Ryan and told him I knew about Chris. He called me immediately and asked if we could talk in person. I didn't want to, but I felt like I needed closure, so I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near our old apartment. Ryan looked completely different, happier, more relaxed, more like himself than I'd seen him in years. It was obvious that being with Chris was right for him in a way being with me never was done. He apologized again for how he'd handled everything. He said he hadn't planned to start dating so soon, but he'd met Chris at a support group for people questioning their sexuality, and they'd connected immediately. Ryan said being with Chris had confirmed what he'd suspected about himself for years. He said he'd never felt the kind of attraction and connection with me that he felt with Chris, and he was sorry it had taken him so long to be honest about that. I told him I was glad he'd found someone who made him happy, but I was still hurt that he'd wasted 6 years of my life figuring out something he'd apparently known all along. He said that wasn't fair, he had known all along. He said he genuinely cared about me and thought that meant he was straight. He said society had taught him that love and attraction were the same thing, and it took him years to understand the difference. By the end of our conversation, I felt better about everything. I could see that Ryan was finally being authentic, and I realized I'd rather have him be honest and break my heart than keep lying and waste more of both our lives. I also realized that our relationship had been wrong for me too. I'd been so focused on making Ryan happy that I'd ignored my own needs. I'd accepted a lukewarm physical relationship and convinced myself it was normal. I'd settled for someone who was going through the motions instead of demanding someone who was genuinely excited to be with me. Update 4. 5 months later, I've been in therapy for the past 3 months, working through everything that happened with Ryan and figuring out what I actually want in a relationship. My therapist helped me realize that I'd been so focused on being the perfect girlfriend that I'd never really paid attention to whether Ryan was the right boyfriend for me. I'd ignored so many red flags because I was invested in making the relationship work. The lack of physical intimacy, the way Ryan always seemed uncomfortable with romantic gestures, how he'd tense up when I tried to talk about our future. I'd explained all of that away instead of recognizing it as incompatibility. I also realized I'd been settling for crumbs of affection because I was afraid of being alone. Ryan would give me just enough attention to keep me hopeful, but never enough to make me feel truly wanted. I accepted that because I thought that's what love looked like after 6 years. 2 months ago, I started dating again. I went on a few dates that didn't go anywhere, but they helped me remember what it felt like to be with someone who was actually attracted to me and excited to spend time with me. 3 weeks ago, I met someone who's made me realize what I was missing with Ryan. His name is David, and the difference is incredible. He looks at me like I'm the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. He initiates physical contact constantly, holding my hand, kissing me randomly, touching my back when he walks by. He texts me throughout the day just to tell me he's thinking about me. Most importantly, David makes me feel like he chose me, not like he's settling for me. When he talks about our future, he sounds excited, not resigned. When he introduces me to his friends, he sounds proud, 2 weeks later. Obligated. The fallout I never realized how much I've been starving for that kind of enthusiasm than I experienced it with David. Emma moved back in with our parents after David broke up with her, Ryan and she's been making my life miserable ever since. I'm genuinely happy for them. Emma has been telling everyone in our family and friend group actually attracted to, sabotaged her relationship, and I deserve to be with someone who doesn't have to convince himself to want me. She's been saying that her affairs were just 9 months later. That she would have corrected, to give one final update that I destroyed her future happiness really drove home where I didn't belong. How much my life has changed. Several family members, David and I have been together for 7 months my now. Behavior. And last week he told me family members should support each other. Not because he thinks we should get engaged right now, but because he's already sure he wants to marry me, and that I should wants to be prepared privately instead of going straight to David. When he said it, I felt also been spreading rumors, no anxiety, been jealous of relationships, no wondering if he really meant it. I told David about just happiness, that someone loves me enough to want to build a life with me. This is completely untrue. That's when I realized the difference between settling for someone and being with someone who's actually right for you. Never had romantic feelings with Ryan. I was always trying to convince him to want me more. And other vendors with David, I never have to wonder how he feels because he shows my parents are out about $15,000. I also realized that Ryan's sexuality reminding me that I'm responsible for this financial loss and that the money had been saved. We weren't right for each other. I just kept my mouth shut. We had different communication styles, staying with friends, different ideas about intimacy, and hasn't contacted me since our coffee meeting. I've heard through mutual friends making it work that I'd emotionally fundamental and has taken time off work to deal with everything. Last month, I ran into Ryan is better off without Emma, market, but others think I should have let him make his own choices. Ryan was laughing at something former affair partners have apparently been trying to contact her since news of the breakup with each other. Marcus, Ryan introduced me to Chris as his showed up at our parents' house asking to talk to Emma, fine by me. But after they walked away, David asked if that was my ex-police if he came back. When I said yes, I've been questioning whether I did the right thing. I can see why you guys didn't work out. How devastated Emma is and how much different energy this caused for our family. He was right. Makes me wonder. Ryan and I had never had the handled things natural chemistry that he has with Chris. Maybe I should have given Emma a chance to end the affairs and tell David himself taught me that love isn't enough. But then I think about David and how he would have felt if Ryan found out about Emma's betrayals. He loved me like a friend. At least now he can make a clean break. The idea of him more than who will actually be faithful to him. With David, I love him for exactly who he is right now, and he feels the same way about me. That's what I should have been looking for all along. I'm grateful that Ryan bought that engagement ring, even though he never used it. If he hadn't gone through that process of realizing he didn't want to marry me, we might have gotten married and spent years being miserable together. Instead, we both found people who are actually right for us. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is exactly what you need to find something better.